Hello, world history students. This lecture is the second lecture of Unit 1. This is a lecture on the first of four river valleys or river valley civilizations that we'll be talking about. Today's lecture is on Mesopotamia, or the land between the two rivers. The land between the two rivers is in more or less modern-day Iraq, and the two rivers are the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. Here's the Mediterranean Sea over here. The rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, both start up here in some mountains which are in modern-day Turkey, and the geographical advantage to living in this area, which is also called the Fertile Crescent, is that the Tigris and the Euphrates flood fairly frequently. The water comes down from these mountains and spills over in the bank. It spills over the banks of the river and floods the local land, really on either side of the Tigris and either side of the Euphrates. And floods obviously are bad. We'll talk about the challenges of that in just a moment. But the advantage of having a flood is that there is rich soil that these floods are bringing out of the mountains and bringing down into the river valley and spreading this good soil, this fertile soil over some area next to the river. Well, that area next to the river then becomes a place with fertile soil and a place where people can plant crops and where they can grow things really pretty well. So that is the advantage. That's the geographical advantage of living in a flood-prone place. The challenge is, though, flooding is in Mesopotamia unpredictable. So it happens, from time to time, and they're really not expecting it. And so it can catch them off guard. It could flood a village. It can flood a city. It can destroy crops that are growing if they don't know it's coming and they don't know how to deal with it. Also, this area, although north of the Fertile Crescent or north of Mesopotamia, there are these mountains. These mountains are passable. They are, easily traversed, or they can be traversed. Also, invasions can come up from the south and east. They can come up from the south and the west as well. They can come from the north. This is a place that doesn't really have natural barriers to invasion. A gigantic river or a mountain chain that is impassable, that's impossible for an army to get through. And this area, this Mesopotamia, this Fertile Crescent, gets invaded time and time again throughout history. So no natural barriers to invasion is a challenge, is a geographical challenge to living in this area. Another geographical challenge is, you can't read it here because I'm in the way, but it says building materials are scarce. This is a very deserty environment. There aren't really a lot of trees, no wood. You're not going to be able to build very easily. Obviously, with scarce wood. What they end up doing, as you'll see, is building with clay. They put together dirt and water and create clay bricks, or are able to use clay to create clay structures. But three challenges and geographical challenges to living there, and just one advantage. Sumer is the first civilization in Mesopotamia. It is about 3000 BCE, so about 5,000 years ago. And Sumer is politically organized into city-states like Ur or Lagash or Uruk. There are a number of them. And a city-state is a city which is surrounded by farmland, and the city controls the farmland. The farms are growing food for the people in the city. Those are the specialized workers that we talked about in the last lecture. And so that's what a city-state is, and that's how Sumer, or the first of these Mesopotamian civilizations, are organized. In addition to that, these city-states are led in a very similar way. They're led at first by a priest. Before they start to fight with one another or fight with others outside of this area. Priests are the ones who are organizing, for example, the irrigation systems that they're using in order to kind of control the flooding a little bit better or water their crops a little bit better. Over time, though, they start to get involved in military conflicts, either with each other or with outsiders. This doesn't happen a lot, but it happens enough so that the priests need to find someone who has a more warrior mentality, and so we start to get warriors in charge of these cities, and those warriors eventually become kings. So these rulers, the system of rule goes from priests to kings, more or less. The city-states generally cooperate with one another. They generally trade with one another. But as I said, sometimes they go to war with one another. In terms of culture, all of them had these structures here. This is a ziggurat, and once again, it's made out of clay, really quite large. In fact, you can see the stairs going up. But what a ziggurat is in Mesopotamia is kind of a catch-all building. It is a temple. This is where the priests are taking in sacrifices that people are bringing them. It's also a kind of city hall at first, where once again the priests were ruling from. And then it's also a storehouse because people are sacrificing food to the gods to keep them happy. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. And so it becomes a kind of grain storehouse as well, for what the people are growing and bringing there and sacrificing to the gods. In terms of social classes, and every society has social classes from the top to the bottom. In Mesopotamia, the kings and the priests are at the top. The kings dealing with political power, and the priests dealing with religious power. And there's kind of a wide middle class of merchants, people who are trading, or artisans, people who are creating goods like pottery, like tools. The field workers, the farmers, all three of those different groups of people are sort of in the middle. And then at the very bottom of society, there are slaves. Slaves could be people captured by the Mesopotamians in war, or they could actually be Mesopotamians themselves who had gotten into debt trouble. They owed somebody so much money that they would sell off family members into slavery, or even the entire family could be sold into slavery to pay off debts. Women at this point in time in Sumerian or Mesopotamian culture have a little bit more in terms of rights than they would have in later civilizations. Women at this point in time could become priestesses, working in the temple, and women could also have other jobs as well. That's not always possible in every civilization. I'd like to define a term called cultural diffusion, because as the Mesopotamians are starting to create a system of government, a system of organization, city-states, starting to trade different kinds of goods, creating different goods, inventing goods, and so on, they come in contact with people who are their neighbors, and their culture spreads, it diffuses. And so you think about some of the things that the Mesopotamians have, or that they're doing, and their neighbors see them, ask about them, like them, and then adopt them as well. This is cultural diffusion. So, for example, the Mesopotamians had kind of figured out how to live in cities, how to organize a city-state. They had a system of religion that had very specific gods and had very specific beliefs about what these gods were all about. And law codes, they come up with law codes, how to live in a society together. They have got a system of writing that we'll talk about in just a moment. And once again, all the goods that they're trading. So their neighbors look at those kinds of things, the religion, how to live in a city, how to have law codes, how to write in the Mesopotamian way, how to grow certain crops. All of these things are part of their culture that gets diffused to their neighbors. And this is a process that happens all over the world all of the time. So once again, the Sumerian or Mesopotamian religion is a little bit different than religions that we'll see later on. It is a polytheistic religion. In other words, there isn't one god or no god. There are many gods. That's what polytheism is. And so you can see some of the gods over here in statue form. The Mesopotamian gods are kind of very human in the way that they act. They get jealous. They fight with each other. They might mess with people on Earth just for fun. They're really pretty unpredictable, and they had to be kept happy with sacrifices. And so people bring things that they create. If it's a farmer, they're bringing in, agricultural produce. If it's a shepherd or somebody who tends animals, they might bring in sheep, or they might bring goats or an ox or what have you, and give them to the priests. The priests then sacrifice the animals or sacrifice the food to the gods, and try to keep the gods happy. If the gods are happy, then they're going to do nice things for people on Earth. For example, have the crops grow well, or have floods not happen. If they're angry, crops might fail, or there might be a flood, or somebody's baby might die. And so keeping them happy was really quite important. The Mesopotamian belief in the afterlife, for a lot of people all over the world, the afterlife is a place where if you're morally good, you go to an afterlife. You have life after death. But the Mesopotamians don't have a connection between being good and the afterlife. The afterlife is always going to be bad in Mesopotamian belief. And so the afterlife is a kind of dismal, gloomy, and sad place where people eat dust and clay and are never happy. That's what this is showing you down here. This kind of miserable people in the Sumerian or Mesopotamian afterlife. Some of the inventions of the Mesopotamians are really quite useful. The wheel as a system of using carts and wagons and so on, and even chariots to transport things. The sail is great for propelling boats. If you don't want to row a boat, you've got a sail, then the wind can push you. The plow is introduced by the Mesopotamians as well, or the Sumerians as well. It's a way of churning up soil that you want to plant seeds in, and that works really quite well to improve agricultural productivity. The metal that they were using was bronze. Copper is generally the first metal technology that people come up with, and then bronze is a way of combining copper and tin to create a slightly stronger metal, and then eventually iron becomes a metal technology, which is even more useful and better than bronze and copper. Really quite important for Mesopotamia, and what we need to know about is their system of writing. They come up with a system of record keeping. Remember, that's one of these elements of civilization that we talked about in the last lecture, how to keep records, based on government or religion and so on. What they come up with is this thing called cuneiform, and it is a system of taking wet clay tablets and sticking something into them to make imprints or indentations in this clay tablet to spell out whatever it is that they want to keep a record of. And so oftentimes these records are, like we talked about last lecture, they are tax records, or they are records of what people sacrifice to the gods, or they are maybe talking about who is the ruler at any given time and kind of keeping a record of who the rulers were going back into the past. They even have really what is probably the first story in human civilization that is written, which is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's a story about Gilgamesh and his friend Enki, who have all of these adventures together before Enki dies. So cuneiform is the system of writing. Like I say, it's clay tablets. It's wonderful for historians because many of these clay tablets can still be found and they can be read. But from the period of several thousand years ago, 4,000 or so years ago, it's not a great way to keep records because you can't erase on it, for example, and it's really kind of a bulky way of keeping records. But that's what they had, cuneiform. Well, the Mesopotamians were really quite an attractive civilization, a wealthy civilization, a successful civilization. And so outsiders wanted to get a hold of that, and they invaded time and time again. The people who actually took over the Mesopotamians were the Neo-Babylonians, or the Babylonians. You might have heard of the city of Babylon, which is their capital city. And around the year 2000 BCE, or about 4,000 years ago, the Babylonians are peaking. They're achieving their greatest heights under a guy by the name of Hammurabi. I believe this is Hammurabi's face and head in a artistic representation. Well, Hammurabi is able to take over all of these city-states of Mesopotamia and create, really for the first time, a kind of Mesopotamian empire. An empire is a number of different kingdoms or a number of different city-states together. And so Hammurabi wants to make sure that all of this territory that he's taken over has the same or uniform legal system for his entire empire. And so that's the reason behind Hammurabi's code. And we're going to get to look at Hammurabi's code in a day or so, and you can answer then the EQ that is associated with that. Explain what we can learn about Mesopotamian culture from Hammurabi's code of laws. I'll let you do that. I'm not going to tell you about that today, but we'll read that. We'll kind of translate some of these things in more easy to understand English, and then you can kind of discover some things about Mesopotamian civilization based on that. The last group of people that we want to talk about from this area, and the last people who take over Mesopotamia, come from uh, come from nearby. They're called the Assyrians. They too create an empire. They take over Mesopotamia and some other places as well. They are active between about 850 BCE and 612 BCE, and they're really known for being kind of like the bad guys. Really, they have a very advanced military. They put all of their uh, all of what they want to do into being soldiers and being really quite aggressive. They have iron weapons. Iron weapons are stronger than bronze weapons or copper weapons. When they fight with people who have bronze or copper weapons, they usually end up winning. And they're really pretty nasty rulers. They are people who show no mercy to the people that they conquer, and they really don't allow them to have any kind of freedom. In fact, from time to time, they make examples of people. They might kill all of the people of a village or kill all of the people of the city to frighten other cities under their control into not rebelling against them. So the Assyrians are really kind of a nasty group of people. They're going to annoy their neighbors so much that their neighbors are going to end up ganging up on them and taking them over and ending the Assyrian Empire. So I hope I got to most of the EQs that you needed for today. We're going to do a reading on Mesopotamia, and like I said, we'll have a look at Hammurabi's code over the next couple of days. So if after all of that you don't have some of the EQs, then we can certainly talk about it. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.